I arrived at the restaurant an hour early. It was a stupid mistake, a mix-up with the time I'd written down in my planner, but that mistake saved my life. Or rather, it gave it back to me. When I pushed open the door to the private room my daughter had reserved for her engagement dinner, I heard voices. I immediately recognized Jessica's laugh, the one I had heard since she was a baby. She was in there with Carter, her fiancé. They were talking about me, and what I heard in the next 10 minutes destroyed 38 years of my life. I stood frozen behind that half-open door, in my burgundy dress and my freshly polished shoes, while my only daughter planned to erase me from her existence as if I were trash she needed to throw out before starting her new life. They said I was an embarrassment, a problem to be solved. A pathetic old woman they had to hide in some nursing home far from the city so I wouldn't ruin their reputation in front of Carter's wealthy family. They talked about taking my house, my savings, everything I had. Jessica laughed when Carter asked if I would suspect anything. She said no, that I was too dumb, too naive, too trusting to realize a thing. In that moment, something inside of me broke, but I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't go in to confront them. I walked away in silence, left the restaurant without anyone seeing me, and as I walked through the streets with tears streaming down my cheeks, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to beg for their love. I wasn't going to plead for them to treat me with dignity. I was going to do something much better. I was going to give them exactly what they deserved. But first, let me tell you how I got here. How a mother who gave everything for her daughter ended up eavesdropping while that same daughter planned to destroy her. There are moments in life that change you forever. Moments when the floor disappears from under your feet and everything you believed in crumbles in a matter of seconds. For me, that moment came on a Tuesday evening, when I mixed up the time for Jessica's engagement dinner and arrived 60 minutes ahead of schedule. 60 minutes, that would change everything. The restaurant was almost empty when I walked in. Only a few waiters were setting the tables, folding white napkins with precision, arranging crystal glasses that sparkled under the ceiling lamps. The air smelled of fresh flowers and newly baked bread. Everything was perfect, elegant, exactly as Jessica had planned for months. I am 69 years old. I have been a widow for 11 years. My whole life I believed that a mother's love was unbreakable, unquestionable, eternal. I believed the sacrifices I made had a purpose. I believed my daughter loved me as much as I loved her. That evening, I discovered I was completely wrong. I approached the reception podium, but no one was there. I heard voices coming from the private room at the back of the restaurant, the one Jessica had reserved for the dinner. I recognized her laugh immediately. That crystalline laugh I had heard since she was a baby, the same one that filled our small house when she was a little girl running through the yard chasing butterflies. I walked toward it with a smile on my lips, ready to surprise her, to hug her, to tell her how proud I was of her. My only daughter was getting married. Jessica, my girl, the reason I breathed, was about to start a new chapter with Carter Sterling, that man from a wealthy family who looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. Oh, how wrong I was. But when I got close to the half-open door of the room, I stopped. Something in the tone of her voice made me pause. It wasn't the sweet Jessica I knew. It was someone else. Carter was with her. I heard his deep voice, the one that had always seemed so polite and respectful to me. They were talking in low voices, but the empty room amplified every word as if they were inches from my ear. What I heard in the next few minutes changed my life forever. Carter asked something about the table arrangements, about where I would be getting up during the dinner. Jessica sighed. A tired, annoyed sigh, as if talking about me was an exhausting chore. Then she said something I will never forget. She said that I was a problem she needed to solve soon, that she couldn't let me ruin her new life, that Carter and his family were important people, with connections, with a reputation, and that I, with my cheap dresses and my small-town manners, was an embarrassment. I stood there, paralyzed. My hand trembled on the wooden doorframe. I felt my heart stop, the air escape my lungs, the world spin too fast for me to keep my balance. Carter laughed. A soft, complicit laugh. He said he understood perfectly. That after the wedding, once they were settled in their new house, they would look for a place where I could be more comfortable. A nursing home, maybe. Or some facility far from the city where I could live quietly without bothering anyone. Jessica agreed. She said it was for the best. That I was getting older, that I needed care she couldn't provide, that it was time for her to think about her future and not keep carrying baggage from the past. Baggage from the past. That's what my own daughter called me. As if the 38 years I had dedicated to her were just a dead weight she now had to abandon in some forgotten corner. The sleepless nights when she was sick. The cleaning jobs I took to pay for her college. The endless sacrifices to make sure she never lacked anything. All of that was now just baggage from the past. Carter mentioned money. He asked if I had any savings, any property. Jessica replied that the house where we lived was still in my name, but she was working on that. That after the wedding she would get me to sign some papers. She would convince me that it was best to sell and that she would manage the money for me. For my own good, of course. I heard how they planned to take everything I had, the house my late husband and I bought with so much effort, the savings I had kept for decades, thinking that one day they could help my daughter if she needed it. I listened as my own daughter, the child I carried in my womb, who I fed with my body, who I protected with my life, planned to rob me, hide me, erase me from her existence as if I had never mattered. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was when Carter asked if I would suspect anything, if I would realize their intentions. Jessica laughed again. That laugh I loved so much now sounded cruel, merciless. She said no. That I was too naive, too trusting, too dumb to see what was happening right in front of my nose. That I had always been like that. That for years she had pretended to love me only because it was convenient, because she needed my support, my money, my house. But now she didn't need me anymore. Now she had Carter. Now she had a better life waiting for her. She said I was a pathetic old woman living in the past, clinging to memories of when she was a child, unable to understand that people change, that relationships have an expiration date, that a mother's love doesn't mean eternal slavery. In that moment, something inside me shattered into 1,000 pieces. But not how you would expect. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't storm into the room to confront them. I stood there, motionless, listening to every poisonous word that came from the mouth of the person I loved most in this world. And as I listened, I felt something new being born inside me. Something cold, something calculating, something I had never experienced before. Rage. Not the explosive rage that makes you scream and break things. This was different. It was a quiet, patient, intelligent rage. It was the rage of a woman who had just woken up after decades of deep sleep. I backed away from that door without a sound. I left the restaurant with the same care I had entered. No one saw me arrive. No one saw me leave. I walked through the streets as the sun began to set behind the buildings. Tears ran down my cheeks, but I didn't wipe them away. I let them fall freely while my mind worked at full speed, processing what I had just heard. For 69 years, I had been an obedient woman, a devoted wife, a sacrificial mother. I always put others first. I always swallowed my own desires, my own dreams, my own needs, for the good of my family. And this is how they repaid me. But that evening, walking alone through those streets that suddenly seemed foreign, I made a decision that would change everything forever. I wasn't going to confront them. I wasn't going to cry in front of them. I wasn't going to beg them to love me. I wasn't going to be the pathetic victim they expected me to be. I was going to do something much better. I was going to give them exactly what they deserved. When I returned home that night, I was no longer the same person who had left hours earlier. I still smiled when Jessica called to confirm I would be at the dinner the next day. I still used that sweet, motherly tone she expected to hear. I still pretended to be the naive, trusting mother they thought I was. But inside, I had already begun to plan every detail of my revenge. They didn't know it yet, but that conversation I overheard wasn't my end. It was my beginning. The engagement dinner would be in 24 hours. And I would be there, smiling, toasting to their happiness. But this time, the foolish mom would have the last word. My name is Helen Miller. I am 69 years old. I am a widow, the mother of a single daughter, and for my entire life, I believed that love conquers all. That if you give yourself completely, if you give everything without expecting anything in return, You will be rewarded with true love. I believed that with every fiber of my being, until I discovered I was living a lie. But to understand how I got to that devastating moment in the restaurant, I need to take you back in time. I need you to know who I was before I became the invisible old woman my daughter described with such contempt. I met Robert, my husband, when I was just 20 years old. I worked as a secretary in a small downtown office. I earned very little, but it was enough to help my mother. He was a mechanic. His hands were always stained with grease, but he had the kindest eyes I had ever seen in my life. We got married a year later, in a simple ceremony with barely 20 guests. We didn't have money for anything big, but we didn't care. We had love, and back then, that seemed like enough. For 5 years we tried to have children. 5 years of broken hopes, of medical tests, of silent tears in the bathroom, while Robert held me and told me everything would be okay. The doctors said it was almost impossible, that we should accept that we might never be parents. And then came Jessica. When the doctor confirmed my pregnancy, I cried for 3 straight days, out of happiness, disbelief, and sheer terror that something might go wrong. Robert sold his motorcycle, the one he loved so much, to pay for the prenatal visits. He worked double shifts for months to make sure I could rest, that I wanted for nothing, that our baby would have everything it needed. Jessica was born on a Tuesday in September. She weighed exactly 6 pounds and 10 ounces. She had Robert's eyes and my small nose. When they placed her in my arms for the first time, I swore I would do everything possible to make her happy, that she would never lack love, protection, or opportunities. That I would be a better mother than mine was to me. And I kept that promise, perhaps too well. The first few years were hard but beautiful. Robert worked long hours at the auto shop. I left my job to take care of Jessica full-time. We lived in a small 2-bedroom house in the suburbs, with a tiny yard where Jessica learned to walk, to run, to laugh. We had no luxuries, but we had what was important. We had a family. Jessica was a bright, intelligent, curious child, always asking questions about everything. In school, she got the best grades. The teachers told me she had a promising future, that with the right education, she could go very far. And I clung to that idea like a life raft. I wanted my daughter to have everything I never had: opportunities, education, a better future. So when Jessica turned 12 and started showing interest in private schools, Robert and I made a decision. He would work even more hours. I would find a part-time job. We would do whatever it took to pay for that school my daughter wanted so badly. I found a job cleaning houses. 3 times a week, I would go clean the mansions of rich people who lived on the other side of town. I scrubbed floors, washed bathrooms, ironed clothes while thinking of Jessica studying in her new uniform, surrounded by children from wealthy families, learning things I never had the chance to learn. It was worth every backache, every sore knee, every moment of extreme fatigue, because my daughter was happy, because she was building the future I had always dreamed of for her. But something started to change in Jessica when she entered that school. At first, it was small things. She stopped inviting her friends over. She said our house was too small, that she would be embarrassed. She started asking for brand-name clothes, expensive shoes, things we could barely afford but made the effort to buy because we didn't want her to feel less than her classmates. Then the lies began. Small ones at first. She would tell her friends that her father owned the auto shop, not just an employee, that I was a stay-at-home mom by choice, not because I had to clean other people's houses to pay her tuition. She invented stories about vacations we had never taken, about a life we didn't have. When I confronted her, when I asked her why she was lying, she looked at me with those eyes that used to be so sweet and said something I should have taken as a warning. She said she wanted to fit in, that her friends came from important families and she couldn't be the poor one in the group, that if I really loved her, I would understand. And I understood. Or at least, I thought I did. I thought it was just a phase, something normal for a teenager trying to find her place in the world. I thought that over time, she would learn to value where she came from, to be proud of her parents who were working their fingers to the bone to give her everything. I was wrong. Robert died when Jessica was 18. A massive heart attack while he was working under a car. By the time the ambulance arrived, it was too late. I didn't even get to say goodbye. One day he was here, the next he was gone forever. I thought Jessica and I would grow closer after his death, that we would share that pain, that we would support each other as the family we were, but it wasn't like that. Jessica was about to start college. She was more worried about her future than about mourning her father. I used Robert's life insurance to pay for her first year of college. It was a modest amount, barely enough. But it's what Robert would have wanted. I continued cleaning houses to cover the rest of her expenses. Jessica studied business administration at a prestigious private university. I lived on $300 a month, just enough for food and utilities, but I didn't care. My daughter was building her future. During those 4 years of college, Jessica barely came home. She always had excuses. Projects, group work, extracurricular activities. When she did come, she would stay for just a few hours before making up a reason to leave. I would cook her favorite dishes, clean her room even though she no longer used it, and eagerly awaited each of her brief visits as if they were precious gifts. After graduating, she got a good job at a large company. She started earning more money than Robert and I had ever made together in our entire lives. I thought I could finally rest, that maybe she would want to help me, to give back even a little of everything I had invested in her. But Jessica had other plans. She moved into a stylish apartment downtown. She started wearing expensive clothes, frequenting restaurants where a single meal cost more than my weekly budget. And I was still cleaning houses, now in my 60s, with ruined knees and a back that protested every morning when I got up. I never asked her for money, never demanded anything. I just wanted her to visit once in a while, to share even one afternoon a month with me. But even that seemed to be too much to ask. It was around that time she met Carter. She introduced him to me just 3 months after they started dating. Tall, handsome, well-dressed, with that perfect smile that men accustomed to getting what they want always wear. He came from a wealthy family, owners of several properties in the city. Jessica looked at him as if he were her ticket to a better world. And I suppose he was. When Carter entered Jessica's life, I still had hope. I thought that maybe love would soften her, that starting her own family would make her understand everything I had done for her, that she would finally see my sacrifice with new eyes. But what came next was worse than I could have ever imagined. Carter started visiting us occasionally. He was always polite, always smiling, always saying the right things. But I noticed how he looked at our house. That quick, discreet glance that scanned the peeling walls, the old furniture, the worn-out floor. I noticed how he sat on the edge of the sofa, as if afraid of getting dirty. As if everything he touched in my house could infect him with something. Jessica behaved differently when he was present. Her laugh was more forced, her words more careful. She introduced me as her mother, of course, but there was something in her tone that made me feel small, as if she were doing me a favor by acknowledging our relationship. One day, Carter asked for family photographs. He wanted to know our history, he said. Jessica tensed up. Me, naive as always, took out the old albums I kept with so much affection. Photographs of when she was a baby, of her birthdays, of Robert smiling in his mechanic's uniform, of our few vacations to nearby beaches where we camped because we couldn't afford hotels. Carter looked at them with that polite smile plastered on his face. He made appropriate comments. What a lovely family, what great memories. But his eyes told another story. He saw poverty. He saw mediocrity. He saw exactly what Jessica had spent years trying to hide. After that visit, Jessica began to distance herself even more. Her phone calls became shorter, more spaced out. When I invited her for a meal, she always had something more important to do. Work meetings, social commitments. A busy life that apparently had no room for her mother. 6 months passed before I saw her in person again. 6 months in which I lived waiting for a call, a text, any sign that she still cared. When she finally showed up, it was with news. Carter had proposed. They were getting married in 6 months. There would be a big wedding, 200 guests, at the most exclusive hotel in the city. She hugged me when she told me, but it was a cold, mechanical hug, the kind you give out of obligation, not real affection. I cried with happiness. My little girl was getting married. But even as I cried, I felt something strange in my chest. An uncomfortable feeling I couldn't identify. Jessica explained the wedding plans. Everything sounded incredibly expensive, impossibly elegant. I asked if she needed help, if there was anything I could do. She looked at me with an expression I'll never forget. It was a mix of pity and almost amusement. She told me not to worry, that Carter and his family would cover all the expenses, that I just had to show up on the wedding day and enjoy myself. Then came the part that broke my heart. She told me she had hired someone to help me choose an appropriate dress for the wedding. Appropriate, that word hung in the air like poison. She said the wedding would be a high-profile event, that there would be important people, photographers, even some social media reporters, that I needed to look presentable. Presentable, as if I normally wasn't. I agreed because I didn't know what else to do. A week later, a stylish woman with too much makeup appeared at my door. She took me to stores where the dresses cost more than my rent for 3 months. She made me try on dozens of options while looking at me with that critical expression that people accustomed to judging others use. Finally, she chose a simple, almost invisible, dark gray dress. Perfect for going unnoticed, she said. They didn't let me choose. They didn't ask what I liked. They just dressed me up like a doll and sent me back home. The next few months were a blur of preparations that I was not a part of. Jessica would call occasionally to inform me of details, but never to ask for my opinion. The cake tasting, the flower selection, the music, everything was decided without me. I was just one more name on the guest list, a family obligation they had to fulfill. But I told myself I was being dramatic, that brides are always stressed, that after the wedding, everything would go back to normal, that maybe when Jessica settled down, when she started her own family, she would value me more. Maybe when she had her own children, she would understand what a mother's love means. I clung to that hope like a fool. 3 weeks before the wedding, Jessica showed up at my house unannounced. She brought papers. She said she needed me to sign some documents. Boring legal stuff, she explained with a smile. Things related to her change in marital status, family information updates that the banks required. The papers were filled with legal terms I barely understood. Jessica rushed me, said she was in a hurry, that her lawyer was waiting for the signed documents. I took the pen, ready to sign where she indicated, but something stopped me. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the way Jessica avoided my gaze. Maybe it was simply that after 69 years of being naive, something inside me finally woke up. I told her I wanted to read the documents calmly, that I would review them carefully and return them signed the next day. Jessica got annoyed. She said it was unnecessary, that they were just formalities, but I stood firm. For the first time in years, I said no to my daughter. She left in a fury, the unsigned papers in her hand. That night, I stayed up until 3 a.m. reading every word of those documents. I didn't understand everything. The legal language was complicated, but I understood enough. What Jessica wanted me to sign was a power of attorney that gave her total control over my finances and properties. Basically, I would be handing over my house, my savings, everything I had. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. My own daughter was trying to rob me. And the worst part was, she was doing it with a smile, with sweet lies, expecting me to be too foolish to notice. The next day, I returned the papers to her, unsigned. I told her I had consulted an acquaintance who understood law and had advised me not to sign anything without fully understanding the implications. Jessica turned pale. Then she flushed red with anger. She accused me of not trusting her, of ruining her plans, of being a suspicious and paranoid old woman. She cried. She said she was only trying to help me, to protect me, to make sure I would be well cared for when I was older. That she and Carter had planned to use my house as collateral for a business loan that would change their lives. That I could continue living there, of course, but legally the property would have to be in their name. For a moment, she almost convinced me. I almost believed her tears. I almost signed those damned papers just to see her smile again, but I didn't. For the first time in my life, I set boundaries. I told her no. That my house was the only thing I had, the only legacy Robert left me, and I would not hand it over, not even to her. Jessica left my house that day without saying goodbye. She didn't speak to me for 2 weeks. 2 weeks of silence that ate away at me. I wondered if I had done the right thing, if I was being selfish, if I was really ruining my daughter's life by clinging to an old house. But then, a week before the wedding, I received the invitation to the engagement dinner. An intimate event, the card said. Only close family and the wedding party. At the most elegant restaurant in the city, a Tuesday evening at 7. Jessica called to confirm my attendance. Her voice sounded cold, distant, but polite, as if nothing had happened. As if she hadn't asked me to hand over everything I owned. She told me it was important that I attend, that Carter's family would be there, and wanted to get to know me better. I accepted, of course. Because despite everything, despite the pain and disappointment, she was still my daughter. And I was still that foolish mother who believed love could fix anything. I marked the date on my calendar. Tuesday, 7 o'clock in the evening, but I wrote down 6 by mistake. A stupid mistake that would change everything. When that Tuesday arrived, I got ready with care. I put on my best dress, that burgundy one I had bought on sale. I put on a little makeup, something I rarely did. I did my hair meticulously. I wanted to look good for Jessica, for her future husband, for her in-laws. I wanted to show them that I could be presentable too, that I could fit into their elegant world, even if just for one night. I left home an hour early. I was always early for everything, a habit Robert had instilled in me. But when I got to the restaurant and looked at my watch, I realized my mistake. It wasn't 7, it was 6. I had arrived an hour early. I thought about leaving, walking around and coming back at the right time. But it was cold outside, and my new shoes were hurting my feet. I decided to go into the restaurant, maybe order a coffee and wait in a discreet corner until the rest of the guests arrived. That decision, that insignificant moment, was the breaking point of my life. Because when I entered that elegant restaurant, when I heard the voices coming from the private room, when I got closer and recognized my daughter's laugh, I didn't know that I was about to hear the most painful truth of my existence. I didn't know that in the next 10 minutes my entire world would fall to pieces. And I didn't know that those broken pieces would become the weapons I would use to rebuild myself. I left the restaurant like a ghost. No one saw me come in. No one saw me leave. I walked aimlessly through the streets as the sun went down and the city lights began to switch on, one by one. Tears streamed down my cheeks, but I didn't wipe them away. I needed to feel that pain. I needed it to be real. Because a part of me still couldn't believe it. A part of me was still waiting to wake up from this nightmare and discover that it had all been a misunderstanding. That my daughter hadn't said those horrible things about me. That she hadn't planned to rob me, hide me, erase me from her life as if I were garbage. But it wasn't a nightmare. It was real. As real as the cold night air, as the pain in my feet from the new shoes, as the immense emptiness I felt in my chest. I got home after 9 o'clock at night. The house was dark, empty, exactly how my life suddenly seemed to be. I sat on the sofa where Robert used to watch television on Sundays, where Jessica did her homework when she was a little girl, where we had been a family, or so I thought. My phone rang. It was Jessica. For a moment I considered not answering, letting it ring until she gave up. But I answered. Because I was still that mother conditioned to respond when her daughter called. Her voice sounded worried. She said she had waited for me at the restaurant. That I never showed up for dinner. That she had called several times, but I didn't answer. Was everything okay? Had I run into some trouble? I lied. I told her I had felt sick during the afternoon. An upset stomach. Nothing serious, but I didn't feel up to going to the restaurant. I apologized for not letting her know sooner. My voice sounded calm, almost normal. Years of swallowing my pain had taught me how to pretend very well. Jessica seemed relieved. She said not to worry, that she understood perfectly, that the wedding was in less than a week and we would see each other there. She told me to take care and rest. Her voice sounded sweet, concerned, exactly like the voice of a daughter who loves her mother. But I already knew the truth. When I hung up the phone, something inside me changed for good. There was nothing left of the naive Helen who had entered that restaurant hours before. That woman had died the moment she heard her daughter call her pathetic. What was left was someone new, someone cold, someone who had finally opened her eyes. I sat on that sofa until 4 in the morning, thinking, analyzing every detail of the last few years, every sign I had ignored, every moment Jessica had used me, manipulated me, subtly humiliated me, and I had found excuses to justify her. The papers she wanted me to sign, her increasingly infrequent visits, the way she introduced me to Carter, as if I were a shameful burden. It all made sense now. It was all part of the same plan, to get rid of me. But I wasn't going to let that happen. Not like this. Not without a fight. At 5 in the morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront them. I wasn't going to cry or beg. I wasn't going to be the victim they expected me to be. I was going to be smart, strategic, patient. I was going to give them exactly what they deserved. The first thing I did was call Brenda, my only close friend. I had met her years ago when we cleaned houses together. She had retired 2 years earlier, but we stayed in touch. She was one of the few people in my life I could trust. I told her everything. Every word I had heard in that restaurant. Every detail of Jessica's plan to take my house. Brenda was horrified. She cried with me. She hugged me. And then she told me something I'll never forget. She said it was time for me to think about myself for the first time in my life. That 69 years was too long to be someone else's doormat, even if that someone was my own daughter. Brenda helped me find a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but someone who specialized in family law and asset protection. Someone who would understand my situation and know how to protect me legally. 2 days later, I was sitting in the office of Samuel Pierce, a man in his 50s, serious, with thick glasses and an expression that inspired confidence. I told him my story. I showed him the papers Jessica had wanted me to sign. I explained the situation. Samuel listened to me in silence. When I finished, he sighed deeply. He told me he had seen similar cases many times. Adult children who abused elderly parents, emotionally manipulating them to take their properties. It was more common than I imagined. Then he explained my options. I could create a new will immediately, excluding Jessica from any inheritance. I could put the house in a trust that would protect me from any attempt at dispossession. I could document everything to have legal backing if the situation escalated. But there was something else I could do. Something Samuel suggested carefully, measuring every word. I could gather evidence of Jessica's intentions, record conversations, document her attempts at manipulation, build a case that would not only protect me legally, but would publicly expose what she was doing. He explained that for that, I would need time, patience, coldness to continue pretending everything was normal while I collected evidence. He asked if I was ready for that, if I had the strength to act as if nothing had changed while I planned my defense. I looked him straight in the eye and said yes, that I was more than ready, that I had spent 69 years being weak, and now it was time to be strong. Samuel smiled for the first time since I had entered his office. He told me he would help me, that we would do this right, that when we were finished, Jessica wouldn't be able to touch a single penny of what was mine. The next few days were a whirlwind of secret activity. I signed documents. I transferred the house into an irrevocable trust where I was the sole beneficiary. I updated my will, leaving everything to a foundation that helps elderly women instead of Jessica. I took all the money out of my bank accounts and put it in a new account that my daughter didn't know about. Every night I reviewed the documents. I memorized every detail of the plan. During the day, I acted normal. I called Jessica, asked about the wedding preparations, feigned excitement for her big day. My voice sounded as sweet and motherly as ever. But inside I was pure ice. Jessica suspected nothing. She continued to treat me with that mix of condescension and false affection. She kept making plans for her perfect future where I existed only as a solved problem, hidden away in some nursing home far from her glamorous new life. 3 days before the wedding, Samuel called me to his office. He had a proposal. He had been thinking about my case and believed I deserved more than just legal protection. I deserved justice. I deserved for Jessica and Carter to know that they couldn't just use and discard people without consequences. He suggested something I had never considered, publicly exposing what they had planned to do, not in a courtroom where no one but us would know, but in front of all the people they so desperately wanted to impress, in front of Carter's family, in front of the wedding guests, in front of the social world they yearned to belong to. The idea terrified and thrilled me at the same time. It meant public confrontation. It meant a definitive break with Jessica. It meant there would be no turning back. But as I thought about those words I had heard in the restaurant, about how my daughter had called me pathetic, about how they had planned to steal everything I had, I knew there was no turning back anyway. That relationship was already broken. Jessica just didn't know it yet. I told Samuel yes, that I wanted to do it, that I wanted everyone to know the truth. And so we began to plan the exact moment, the perfect place, the most effective way to reveal the true nature of my beloved daughter. The wedding would be the perfect stage. The 3 days before the wedding were the strangest of my life. On the outside, I was the excited mother preparing for her daughter's big day. On the inside, I was a cold strategist, calculating every move of my revenge. Samuel and I met several times in his office. Each meeting lasted for hours. We went over the plan again and again, looking for any flaw, any detail that could go wrong. We couldn't afford mistakes. This had to be perfect. The plan was simple but devastating. During the wedding reception, at the time of the speeches, when all the guests were present and attentive, I would take the microphone, not to give the typical emotional speech of a proud mother, but to reveal the truth about Jessica and Carter. Samuel had prepared all the evidence, copies of the documents Jessica wanted me to sign, with a legal analysis clearly showing they were an attempt to strip me of my assets. Bank statements showing how I had spent my last savings on her education while she earned 5 times more than me and never helped me with a single dollar. Emails between Jessica and Carter, where they discussed what to do with me after the wedding. But the most important piece of evidence was something I would have to get myself. A recording. Samuel explained that we needed Jessica to say, out loud, in her own words, what she really thought of me. We needed her to incriminate herself. He gave me a small recording device, no bigger than a matchbox. He taught me how to use it, how to hide it, how to make sure it captured everything clearly. I felt like I was in a spy movie, except this was painfully real. The night before the wedding, I called Jessica. I told her I needed to see her, that there was something important I wanted to give her before her big day, something special I had saved for years, waiting for this moment. Jessica hesitated. She said she was incredibly busy with the final preparations, but when I mentioned that it was her grandmother's jewelry that Robert had inherited from his mother and that I had saved for this moment, her tone changed immediately. Of course, she would come. She would stop by my house in an hour. There was no jewelry. There never had been. It was a lie to lure her in. But I knew Jessica couldn't resist. She had always loved valuable things, possessions she could show off, that could boost her status. While I waited for her to arrive, I prepared everything carefully. I hid the recording device in the pocket of my apron. I made coffee and cookies, as I always did when she visited. I acted like the loving mother she expected to find. Jessica arrived exactly 1 hour later. She was wearing an expensive cream-colored dress, her hair perfectly styled, her nails freshly manicured. She looked radiant, happy, ready for her big day. She looked like someone whose life was about to become perfect. She had no idea what was coming. I greeted her with a smile. I hugged her like I always did. I offered her coffee, which she refused, saying she was trying to avoid caffeine before the wedding. She sat on the edge of the sofa, just as Carter used to, as if the furniture might dirty her. I told her the jewelry was put away in my bedroom. That first I wanted to talk with her for a moment, mother and daughter, before everything changed. Jessica sighed. That sigh I knew so well, the sigh of someone who has more important things to do but is forced to be polite. She told me she didn't have much time, that they were waiting for her at the hotel for the rehearsal dinner with the wedding party. Perfect. She was in a hurry. People in a hurry let their guard down. They say things they normally wouldn't. I started by talking about her father, about how he would be so proud to see her get married, about how he had worked himself to death to give her everything she needed, about how his last wish was for me to always take care of her. Jessica nodded distractedly, glancing at her phone every few seconds. Then I mentioned the house. I said I had been thinking a lot lately, that this house was too big for me alone, that maybe she was right when she suggested I sell it and move somewhere smaller. That got her attention. She put down her phone and looked at me directly for the first time since she had arrived. I told her I had been considering her advice, that maybe I did need help managing my money, my properties, that maybe she and Carter had better ideas about what to do with it all. Jessica's eyes gleamed. It was the look of a predator who has just seen its prey weaken. She smiled. That sweet smile she had perfected over years of manipulation. She told me she was so glad to hear that she had been worried about me, that at my age it was difficult to handle so many responsibilities, that she only wanted what was best for me, that after the wedding, when she got back from her honeymoon, we would sit down calmly and review everything to make it better for my future. I nodded. I acted relieved. I acted like the confused old woman she expected me to be. Then I asked her directly what exactly she and Carter had planned for me. I wanted to understand it well. I wanted to know what my life would be like after they took charge of everything. Jessica relaxed completely. She thought she had convinced me, that I had finally given in. She began to speak more freely. She explained that it would be best to sell the house, that the money would be invested in the business Carter was planning to start, a consulting firm that required seed capital. Of course, I would receive dividends when the business was successful. I shouldn't worry about that. I asked her where I would live if we sold the house. Jessica paused. Then she said they had been researching some very nice communities, places where there were people my age, where I would have company, activities, available medical care. She said I would be much happier there than alone in this old house full of sad memories. I asked if these communities were nearby, if she could visit often. Another pause, longer this time. Jessica avoided my gaze. She said the best options were on the outskirts of the city. Some were even in another state, but that it didn't matter because she would visit me when she could, and we could always talk on the phone. I could feel the recording device in my pocket capturing every word, every lie wrapped in false concern. Then I asked the most important question, the one I needed her to answer with total clarity. I asked if she really believed I needed to be in a facility, if she really thought I couldn't take care of myself anymore, or if there were other reasons. Jessica tensed up. I could see the calculation in her eyes. How much could she say without sounding cruel? How much truth could she reveal without breaking the illusion of being the worried daughter? Finally, she spoke. She said it wasn't just about me. It was about them too. That she and Carter were starting a new life. A life that required a certain image, certain social expectations. That Carter's family moved in very specific circles. Circles where appearances mattered. I asked what I had to do with their social circles. Jessica sighed. That sigh of frustration from someone who has to explain the obvious. She said I didn't understand how that world worked. That people judge. That when they met Carter and his family and saw our house, my clothes, my way of speaking, they made comments. Nothing bad, she clarified quickly. Just observations about the differences between our families. She said she couldn't keep introducing me as her mother without it affecting how they saw her, without them associating her with poverty, with the lower class, with everything she had worked so hard to leave behind. There it was, the truth finally coming from her mouth. I was an embarrassment, a shameful reminder of where she came from, an obstacle to the life she wanted to build. I asked her if she had ever truly loved me, if any of those hugs, those sweet words, those promises to always be together had been real. Jessica looked at me with an expression I will never forget. It was a mix of impatience and something that almost looked like pity. She said, of course she loved me, in her own way, but that love has limits. That I couldn't expect her to sacrifice her future to maintain a relationship that had already served its purpose. That she had needed me when she was a child, when she was studying, when she was building her career. But now it was different. Now she had her own life, and that life had no room for me. Every word was a blow. But I kept my face serene. I maintained the act. The resigned mother who finally understood her place. I told her I understood, that maybe she was right, that maybe it was time for each of us to go our separate ways. Jessica seemed relieved. She took my hand. She told me she loved me, that this was for the best for both of us, that one day I would understand. Then she asked about the jewelry. I told her I would look for it after the wedding, that I wanted her to focus on her big day without any worries. Jessica seemed disappointed, but she nodded. She stood up to leave. Before she walked out, I hugged her, tightly, like I used to when she was a little girl. She stiffened in my arms, but didn't pull away. I whispered in her ear that I loved her, that I would always love her, no matter what. And it was true. Despite everything, despite the devastating pain, a part of me would always love that little girl who was once my entire world. But that didn't mean I would forgive her. The wedding day dawned clear and sunny. One of those perfect days that look like they're out of a magazine. The kind of day every bride dreams of. Ironic, I thought as I dressed in front of my bedroom mirror. The most beautiful day for what would be Jessica's worst nightmare. I put on the gray dress they had chosen for me. That dress designed to make me invisible, to let me go unnoticed among the elegant guests. I put on my makeup carefully. I did my hair exactly as they had instructed. On the outside, I was the obedient mother playing her part. On the inside, I was someone else entirely. In my purse, I carried more than just lipstick and tissues. I carried a copy of all the documents Samuel had prepared. I carried the device with the recording of last night's conversation with Jessica. I carried the keys to my new life, though no one knew it yet. Samuel had called me early that morning to go over the plan one last time. He asked if I was sure, if I really wanted to do this. I told him I had never been more sure of anything in my life. He wished me luck and reminded me that he would be among the guests, discreetly positioned near the speaking area, ready to intervene if anything went wrong. The ceremony was at 4 o'clock in the afternoon at a historic church downtown. The reception would begin at 6 at the most exclusive hotel in the city. All paid for by Carter's family, of course. 200 guests, a live orchestra, a 7-course dinner. The kind of wedding that costs more than I earned in my entire working life. I arrived at the church an hour early. Jessica was already there with her bridesmaids, all girls from wealthy families who looked at her as if she were a queen. When she saw me, her smile was brief and tense. She greeted me with a cold kiss on the cheek and then showed me where I should sit. Front row on the bride's side, they told me. The place of honor for the mother. But I didn't feel honored. I felt like a prop. Something that had to be there because protocol dictated it, but that everyone hoped would remain silent and still. I sat on that polished wooden pew and watched as the rest of the guests began to arrive. I recognized a few neighbors from our old neighborhood, people who had known us since Jessica was a little girl, but most were strangers. Elegant people in expensive clothes with expressions of bored superiority. The world Jessica had so desperately wanted to belong to. Carter's family occupied the entire other side of the church. His parents, siblings, aunts, uncles, cousins. A whole dynasty of people accustomed to money and power. They glanced at me with barely concealed curiosity. The bride's poor mother. The anomaly in this perfect event. The ceremony started promptly at 4. Jessica walked down the aisle on the arm of her godfather, a distant uncle she barely knew but who had the appropriate social status. Robert should have been the one to walk her down the aisle. But Robert had been dead for 11 years, worked to death to give this ungrateful daughter everything she wanted. Jessica looked beautiful. I couldn't deny it. Her dress was a work of art. Thousands of dollars in fabric and lace, her face radiant with happiness. Carter waited for her at the altar with that perfect smile. The golden couple. The bright future. If only they knew what was coming. The ceremony was long and traditional. The priest spoke of love, commitment, family. Every word sounded hollow to me. They talked about uniting 2 families as if I were part of that equation. But I knew the truth. I was the shameful secret they planned to hide as soon as this play was over. When the priest asked if anyone had any objection to this union, there was a tense silence. For a moment, I considered standing up, screaming the truth right there in front of everyone, but I held back. It wasn't time yet. I had to wait. I had to be strategic. They were pronounced husband and wife. They kissed. Everyone applauded. I applauded too, my hands numb and a frozen smile on my face. They left the church under a shower of rice and petals. The photographers captured every moment. Perfect happiness, preserved forever in images that Jessica would one day look at and remember as the last day before everything fell apart. At the hotel, the reception was set up like a dream. Tables decorated with flowers that cost more than my monthly rent. Crystal glasses sparkling under enormous chandeliers. A marble dance floor. a stage for the orchestra, and a smaller one for the speeches. That small stage, that was where everything would change. They sat me at a table near the front, but not at the main table. Jessica and Carter presided over that table along with their wedding party and his parents. I was with distant cousins and acquaintances who barely spoke to me. I was invisible even while being present. Dinner was served. 7 courses, as promised. Each dish more elaborate than the last. Food I didn't recognize, presented like art. The people around me ate and chatted animatedly. I barely touched a bite. The knot in my stomach left no room for food. Samuel was 3 tables back. Our eyes met once, and he gave a slight nod. Everything was still going according to plan. After dinner came the dance. First the bride and groom, alone under the spotlights. Then the parents joined in. Carter's father danced with Jessica. His mother danced with Carter. It was the traditional moment where I should have danced with my son-in-law. But no one invited me. No one looked for me. I sat at my table, watching everyone else enjoy themselves while I was completely ignored. It was as if I no longer existed, as if their plan to erase me had already begun. Then came the toasts. The best man gave a funny speech about how Carter had pursued Jessica for months before she agreed to go out with him. The maid of honor spoke about true love and happy endings. The guests laughed and applauded. Everything was perfect. Everything was beautiful. And then it was my turn. The master of ceremonies announced that the mother of the bride wanted to say a few words. He said it almost apologetically, as if it were an annoying but necessary obligation. Jessica tensed in her chair. She wasn't expecting this. We had spoken before, and I had told her I was too shy to give a public speech, that I'd rather not. But I had changed my mind at the last minute. I had told the event coordinator that very afternoon that I wanted to speak, that I had something special to share with the newlyweds on their special day. I rose from my table. I walked to the small stage with slow, deliberate steps. I could feel all eyes on me. The poor mother in her invisible gray dress, climbing onto the stage where moments before elegant and eloquent people had stood. I took the microphone with hands that did not tremble. I took a deep breath. I looked directly at Jessica. Her eyes showed confusion and a bit of alarm. Carter looked bored, probably expecting a sentimental and brief speech from a foolish mother. I began to speak. My voice was louder than I expected. Clearer, firmer. I said I was very excited to be there. That seeing my daughter get married was something I had dreamed of for years. That I had waited for this moment since she was a little girl playing wedding with her dolls. I paused. The guests were smiling. This sounded like a normal motherly speech. Then I said I wanted to tell them a story. The story of a mother who gave everything for her daughter, who worked cleaning toilets and scrubbing floors to pay for her education, who went without food many nights to make sure her daughter had everything she needed, who gave up her own dreams so her daughter could achieve hers. The smiles began to fade. This no longer sounded like a typical speech. Jessica was completely rigid in her chair, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the table. I continued. I said that this mother had believed that love was enough, that if you gave yourself completely, you would be valued, appreciated, loved in return. My voice broke slightly as I said this. It wasn't an act. It was real pain seeping through my mask of calm. I said that this mother had been wrong, that she had recently discovered that her daughter did not love her, that, in fact, her daughter considered her an embarrassment, a problem, something to be gotten rid of. The hall was completely silent now. You could hear the collective breath of 200 people. Jessica had turned pale. Carter was looking at her, not understanding what was happening. Then I took the papers from my purse. I held them up for everyone to see. And I said that I had evidence of everything I was claiming, that I was not a bitter mother making up stories. I was a mother who had finally opened her eyes. Jessica's perfect world was about to collapse. And I had my finger on the self-destruct button. The silence in that ballroom was absolute. 200 people holding their breath, 200 pairs of eyes fixed on me, the invisible mother who had suddenly become impossible to ignore. Jessica tried to get up from her chair, but Carter stopped her, grabbing her arm. He probably thought this was just the rambling speech of an emotional old woman, that it would pass quickly, that they could laugh about it later. They had no idea what was about to happen. I held the papers higher, and my voice grew firmer. I said that 3 weeks before this beautiful wedding, my dear daughter had asked me to sign some documents. She told me they were simple formalities, boring legal matters related to her change in marital status. I paused. I let the tension build. Then I continued. I said that those documents were not formalities. They were a power of attorney that would give Jessica total control over my house, my savings, every penny I had. She was basically asking me to hand over everything her father and I had built over decades of hard work. Some guests gasped. Others began to murmur. Carter's family looked at each other with expressions of confusion and growing alarm. Jessica finally found her voice. She stood up and shouted that it wasn't true, that I was confused, that I was misunderstanding everything. Her voice was desperate, hysterical. She was no longer the elegant, composed bride. She was someone watching her world begin to crumble. I ignored her completely. I continued speaking as if she hadn't said a word. I explained that when I refused to sign those papers, Jessica became furious, that she stopped speaking to me for 2 weeks, that she only contacted me again when she needed to confirm my attendance at this wedding. I said I had found this behavior strange, that a mother tends to notice when something isn't right with her daughter, so I decided to investigate a little more. I pulled another document from my purse. This was a bank statement. I held it up to the audience, even though it was too far for them to read the details. I explained that during the 4 years Jessica was in college, I spent exactly $42,000 on her education. Tuition, books, apartment, food, everything. $42,000 that I earned cleaning houses, scrubbing floors, working until my back screamed in pain and my hands bled. My voice trembled as I said this. The pain was too real, too present. I went on to say that Jessica graduated 7 years ago, that she started working, earning $60,000 a year, an excellent salary for a recent graduate, a salary that grew year after year until it reached the $90,000 she earns today. Carter's parents looked tense. They clearly did not like this information. I asked the audience, rhetorically, how much money they thought Jessica had given me during those 7 years to help me, to pay back even a fraction of what I invested in her. I let the silence answer. Then I said the number. 0. Not a single dollar. Not even when she knew I was still working in my late 60s because I didn't have enough to retire. Not even when my knees began to fail and every step was agony. Jessica screamed again. She said I never asked her for help, that if she had known I needed it, of course she would have helped me. Her voice was shrill, desperate. This time, I looked directly at her. And I smiled. A cold smile I never thought I was capable of forming. I said she was right. I never asked her for help, because mothers shouldn't have to beg their children for basic decency, because I foolishly believed that love meant caring without having to be asked. Then I pulled out my most powerful weapon, the small recording device. I explained that the night before, Jessica had come to my house, that we had a very revealing conversation, a conversation that, fortunately, I had recorded. The color drained from Jessica's face. Carter was staring at her, still not comprehending the scale of the disaster. I asked the event's sound technician to connect my device to the ballroom's audio system. Samuel had arranged this in advance, discreetly bribing the technician that afternoon. The speakers crackled. And then Jessica's voice filled the room. Her voice, saying I was a problem to be solved, that she couldn't let me ruin her new life, that Carter's family moved in circles where appearances mattered, and I, with my cheap dresses and small-town manners, was an embarrassment. Carter's parents went rigid. Other family members began to murmur indignantly. But the recording continued. Jessica's voice, explaining how they planned to sell my house and use my money for Carter's business, how they would send me to a facility far from the city so I wouldn't bother them. And then came the most devastating part. Her voice, saying I was a pathetic old woman, that she had pretended to love me only because it was convenient, that for years she had used me because she needed my support, my money, my house. But now she didn't need me anymore. Every word was a blow, not just to me, to everyone listening. I could see the expressions of horror, of disgust, of complete disbelief on the faces of the guests. When the recording ended, the silence was deafening. Jessica stood by her table, trembling. Tears streamed down her perfectly made-up face. Carter had let go of her and taken a step back, as if she were toxic. Carter's mother stood up. Her face was a mask of contained fury. She said something quietly to her husband. Then they started walking toward the exit. Other members of their family followed. The guests began to get up. Some approached me with expressions of sympathy. Others simply left, uncomfortable with the drama they had just witnessed. Some took out their phones, probably to share this story that would be the talk of the town for months. Jessica tried to approach Carter's family. She tried to explain, to apologize, to fix the disaster, but they ignored her completely. To them, she had just revealed her true nature, and that nature was unacceptable. Carter was frozen in place. His perfect wedding, his carefully constructed reputation, his planned future, all destroyed in a matter of minutes. But I still wasn't finished. I took the microphone one last time. My voice cut through the growing chaos. I said there was one last thing everyone should know. That just this week, I had put my house into an irrevocable trust. That I had changed my will. That every penny I had, every possession, would go to a foundation that helps elderly women who are victims of family abuse. I looked directly at Jessica as I said this. I said she would receive nothing. Absolutely nothing, that I had spent 69 years giving without receiving. But that ended today. Jessica collapsed. She literally fell to the floor, her $1,000 dress crumpling beneath her, sobbing uncontrollably. And I simply placed the microphone on the stage, took my purse, and walked toward the exit with my head held high. For the first time in my life, I was the one leaving, the one taking control, the one deciding when the story was over. Samuel was waiting for me at the exit of the ballroom. He offered me his arm, and I took it. We walked together to the parking lot while the chaos continued behind us. I could hear shouts, cries, the growing murmur of 200 people processing what they had just witnessed. I didn't look back, not once. In the car, Samuel asked me how I felt. I didn't know what to answer. I didn't feel the satisfaction I expected. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt an enormous emptiness where my daughter used to be, an emptiness that hurt more than I could have imagined. But I also felt something else. Something new. Freedom. He took me to his office, even though it was a Saturday night. He said there were some final details we needed to review, documents to sign, decisions to make about my future now that I had completely cut ties with my past. We sat in his office overlooking the illuminated city. He poured me a coffee that I didn't touch, and he explained exactly what I had accomplished with my public exposure. Legally, I was protected. My house, my savings, everything was beyond Jessica's reach. The trust was irrevocable. The will, sealed and registered. There was no way she could claim anything. But there was more. Samuel had discreetly circulated copies of the documents and the recording among several society reporters covering the wedding. By the next morning, the story would be all over the local media. The bride who tried to dispossess her mother. The Sterling family scandal. Jessica's reputation was destroyed. Her marriage, probably too. Carter came from a family that valued image above all else. They would not tolerate being associated with this kind of scandal. Samuel told me all this in a neutral, professional tone, but I could see the approval in his eyes. He had seen many cases of family abuse in his career. He rarely saw victims fight back so effectively. I asked him what would happen now. What came after this? He explained that Jessica would probably try to contact me, that the stage of pleas, promises, and desperate attempts to fix what she had broken would come. He warned me that I had to be prepared to stand firm, that I couldn't let her manipulate me again. I assured him that wouldn't happen, that the Helen who let herself be manipulated had died in that restaurant the day I overheard that conversation. The one who remained was someone different, someone stronger. Samuel took out another document. This one was different. It was a sales contract. For my house. He explained that he had found an interested buyer, a young couple who had just had their first baby. They were offering a fair price, above market value. The money would be enough for me to move somewhere better, smaller, more manageable for someone my age. I looked at the document for a long time. That house was the last thing connecting me to Robert, to the memories of when Jessica was a child, and we were happy. Selling it meant closing that chapter completely, but it also meant freedom. It meant no longer living in a museum of painful memories. It meant starting over. I signed the contract with a steady hand. Samuel smiled. He told me he was proud of me, that not many people my age had the courage to start from scratch, that I was stronger than I thought. I left his office after midnight. The city was quiet. I took a taxi back to my house, that house that would soon no longer be mine. When I walked in, everything looked different. The furniture I had known for decades now seemed to belong to someone else, to another life. The photographs on the walls showed a family that no longer existed. I sat on the sofa where Robert used to watch television, where Jessica did her homework. And for the first time since all this began, I cried. I didn't cry for what I had done. I didn't regret exposing Jessica in front of everyone. She deserved to face the consequences of her actions. I cried for what I had lost, for the daughter I never really had, for the years wasted believing in a love that only existed in my imagination, for the family I thought we had, but which was just an illusion. I cried until there were no tears left. And then I got up, washed my face, and started packing. I had 2 weeks before the house officially belonged to its new owners. 2 weeks to decide what I would take with me into my new life and what I would leave behind. The decision was easier than I expected. I would take very little. The necessary clothes, a few books, the photographs of Robert, because despite everything, those memories were real and valuable. But nothing of Jessica. Not a single photograph of her. Not a single reminder of who she turned out to be. The rest I would donate or sell. Furniture, dishes, decorations, everything that filled this house with ghosts of the past. During those 2 weeks, my phone rang constantly. Jessica called again and again. She left desperate voicemails, crying, pleading, promising it had all been a misunderstanding, that she loved me, that please, I should give her a chance to explain. I never answered. I never responded. I blocked her number after the 5th day. I also received calls from other people, neighbors expressing their support, former co-workers telling me I had done the right thing. Even some of the people who had been at the wedding contacted me to say they admired my courage. The story had gone viral on social media. Someone had recorded part of my speech on their phone. The video had millions of views. The comments were overwhelmingly supportive. Women my age sharing similar stories of ungrateful children. Young people saying they would never treat their parents like that. Jessica and Carter were now infamous, the laughingstock of the city. Their marriage had lasted exactly 3 hours before Carter's parents demanded an immediate annulment. Part of me felt sorry for her, but it was a shrinking part, a part that got smaller with each passing day, because I finally understood something fundamental. I hadn't done this to Jessica. She had done it to herself. I had only exposed the truth. The consequences were hers to face. And I had my own life to focus on now. A life that was just beginning. 3 months after the wedding, I moved into a small apartment in another city, 2 hours away from everything I had known for 69 years. Far from the memories, far from the scandal, far from Jessica. The apartment was modest but bright. It had a small balcony where I could have coffee in the mornings and watch the sunrise. There was a park nearby where I walked every afternoon. There was a library 3 blocks away where I spent hours reading books I never had time to read before. For the first time in my life, I was living for myself. Not for a husband, not for a daughter, just for me. At first, it was terrifying. I would wake up in the mornings not knowing what to do with so much free time, with no one to worry about, with no one whose needs I put before my own. But slowly, very slowly, I learned to enjoy it. I started taking painting classes at a community center. I discovered I had a talent for landscapes. My hands, those hands that had scrubbed floors for decades, now created beauty. I made friends with other women my age, women who had also been through painful divorces, devastating losses, family betrayals. We met on Thursdays for coffee and conversation. We shared our stories without judgment. We supported each other. One of them, Diane, asked me one afternoon if I regretted what I had done, if I wished I had forgiven Jessica instead of exposing her so publicly. I thought about it for a long time before answering, because it was an important question, one I had asked myself many nights when I couldn't sleep. I told her I didn't regret it. That forgiveness doesn't mean allowing yourself to be continually hurt. That true love includes boundaries and consequences. That I had spent too many years being my daughter's emotional doormat. And that wasn't love. It was codependence disguised as maternal sacrifice. I told her I finally understood that I had done Jessica no favors by allowing her to treat me that way. That by never setting limits, by never demanding respect, I had enabled her to become someone capable of discarding people without remorse. And that, maybe, just maybe, facing the consequences of her actions would help her become a better person. Or maybe not. But that was no longer my responsibility. Diane hugged me. She told me I was the bravest woman she knew. I didn't feel brave. I just felt free. 6 months after I moved, I received a letter. It had no return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from Jessica. The letter was 12 pages long. 12 pages of apologies, explanations, justifications. She said she had been in therapy. That she finally understood all the damage she had caused me. That Carter had left her, and she had lost her job due to the scandal. That she was living in a tiny apartment, struggling to pay the bills, facing the consequences of her decisions for the first time in her life. She said she loved me. That she had always loved me. That she was just confused, influenced by Carter and his family, blinded by ambition. That if she could turn back time, she would do everything differently. She asked for forgiveness. She begged for a second chance. She promised to be better. She promised to value me. She promised to show me she could change. I read the letter 3 times. Every word was an echo of the past. Of all the times I had fallen for her tears and promises. Of all the times I had believed that this time would be different. But I was no longer that person. I was no longer the mother desperate for her daughter's love. I was no longer willing to sacrifice my peace for crumbs of affection. I folded the letter carefully. I put it in a drawer with other things from the past that no longer defined me, and I never replied. Because some relationships can't be repaired. Some betrayals are too deep, and that's okay. Not all stories have happy endings of reconciliation. Sometimes the happy ending is simply walking away, choosing yourself, living in peace. Today, I am 70 years old. I have been living in this city for almost a year. My paintings decorate the walls of my apartment. My friends come to visit me on Sundays. My days are quiet, simply mine. Sometimes, when I walk through the park at sunset, I think about everything that happened, about the woman I was before that evening in the restaurant, about how a single overheard conversation completely changed the course of my life, and I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't arrived early that day, if I hadn't heard the truth. I would probably still be the naive Helen. I would probably be in some nursing home far from everything, believing my daughter loved me while she enjoyed my house and my money. But I arrived early. I heard the truth, and I made a decision that saved my life. It wasn't easy. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, exposing my own daughter, breaking with the only family I had left, starting over at 69 years old. But it was worth every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt. Because now, for the first time in my life, I am free. My name is no longer tied to Jessica's. My worth does not depend on being a mother. My identity is not defined by how much I give to others. I am Helen Miller, 70 years old, artist, friend, survivor. And my story doesn't end with an ungrateful daughter who betrayed me. My story is just beginning, because it turns out it's never too late to blossom. It's never too late to choose yourself. It's never too late to close painful chapters and write new ones filled with peace and dignity. To all the women who are reading this, who might be going through something similar, who feel it's too late to change, to walk away, to start over, I say this: it is not too late. It is never too late. Your life belongs to you. Your peace matters. Your dignity is non-negotiable. And if you have to choose between being loved and being respected, always choose respect. Because love without respect isn't love. It's manipulation. I chose respect. I chose dignity. I chose peace, and I have never been happier. This is my story. The story of how I arrived early for a dinner and overheard a conversation that changed everything. The story of how a 69-year-old mother found the courage to stand up for herself. The story of how one life ended and another began. And it's just the beginning.